What if you suddenly lose everything and everyone around you? It was a bright, sunny morning, but inside Sophie's heart, everything felt cold and empty. The world outside seemed to be carrying on just as it always had, people walking around with their coffee cups, cars driving by, and the occasional sound of laughter echoing from a distance. But for Sophie, all of that felt so far away. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Graduation day. Check in now. It was a reminder from her university, but Sophie didn't need reminding. She had already been to the ceremony, already walked across the stage in her cap and gown, already taken the obligatory selfies. But now, a few weeks later, it was just over. The excitement had worn off, leaving behind a feeling of void. Her friends had all scattered in different directions. Some were already starting their internships in bustling cities, others had begun traveling the world. And then there was Sophie. Sitting in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the same posters and books from years ago, unsure of what to do next. It was a feeling she had grown all too familiar with in the past few months. The transition from university life to real life was never easy, but for Sophie, it was like everything she thought she knew was now slipping through her fingers. Her friends were moving on, her family was preoccupied with their own lives, and Sophie was left trying to figure out what the future even looked like for her. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sophie's voice echoed in her mind, imagining herself on a stage. It was a mantra she had seen many YouTubers use, an attempt to connect, to find something that could bring her hope. But the words felt hollow when she said them to herself. What could push me forward? Just as she was about to close her phone and curl back into bed, her screen lit up again with a new notification. It was an email from the one person she never expected to hear from. Subject: an important message from Mr. Hayes. Sophie froze, staring at the name. Mr. Hayes, the principal. She hadn't spoken to him in over 4 years. In fact, she had barely spoken to him during her time at school. He was the kind of principal who ran everything with military precision, no nonsense, always on top of things. Sophie had always found him a bit intimidating, but he had been a fixture of her high school life, someone she had never expected to reach out to. Her fingers trembled as she clicked the email open, her heart racing with curiosity. Dear Sophie, I hope this email finds you well. I'm reaching out because I've been reflecting on the students who have come through our school over the years, and I believe you may be someone who could benefit from a unique opportunity. I would like to invite you to a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss something important. It is not a typical post-graduation offer, but something I believe could be very valuable to you. If you're interested, please reply with your availability, and we can arrange a time to meet. Best regards, Mr. Hayes, Principal, Maplewood High School. Sophie blinked at the screen. She reread the email twice, then a third time, just to make sure she hadn't missed something. What could this possibly be about? It seemed strange, almost like a personal invitation to something exclusive. But why would the principal of her high school want to meet her? She thought back to her time at Maplewood High. She had always kept to herself, no big dramas, no major achievements. She wasn't a star athlete, nor was she a top student in any of her classes. She had kept her head down and tried to coast through. She had friends, but none of them were the type to stand out in any way. Sophie had always considered herself average, unremarkable, even. So, what did Mr. Hayes want with her? Sophie chewed on her lip as she hesitated. Could this be some kind of post-graduation mentorship program? A chance to help students transition into the real world? She hadn't exactly thought she would need any kind of mentoring, but there was something about the email that piqued her interest. Before she could overthink it further, her fingers moved on their own, typing out a simple response. Subject: an important message from Mr. Hayes. Dear Mr. Hayes, thank you for reaching out. I would be interested in learning more about this opportunity. I am available to meet at your convenience. Best regards, Sophie Reynolds. Sophie hit send before she could stop herself. What had she just agreed to? As soon as she clicked away from her email app, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from her best friend, Emma. Emma, hey, I know you're probably still adjusting, but I'm thinking about heading to New York next week for the internship. Are you in? Sophie stared at the message, feeling the weight of it. Emma's life was already moving forward, taking bold steps toward her future. Emma had always known exactly what she wanted, something Sophie had always envied about her. The confidence, the ambition, the direction. Meanwhile, Sophie was stuck, unsure of where to even begin. She glanced back at the email from Mr. Hayes and, without thinking, typed out a quick reply to Emma. Sophie, I'm not sure. I've got some things to figure out, but let me know how it goes. Emma had always been the one to drag Sophie out of her comfort zone, but today, Sophie couldn't bring herself to make any bold moves. She was still stuck in her head, still unsure of what was next for her. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. Sophie distracted herself by scrolling through social media, comparing her life to everyone else's, feeling more disconnected with each post. It felt like everyone had it together but her. She even started to wonder if she was just destined to be lost forever. But then, later that evening, as she sat alone in her room, the phone buzzed once more. It was from Mr. Hayes. Mr. Hayes, let's meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll see you at the school office. Sophie stared at the message. It wasn't a casual coffee invitation. It was official. She had no idea what this meeting was about, but one thing was certain. Whatever happened next was going to change everything. She put the phone down and sighed, staring at the ceiling. What if this is my chance to finally find my way? She didn't know what awaited her in that meeting, but she knew one thing. She had to go. Maybe, just maybe, this meeting could be the start of something new. The next morning, Sophie woke up earlier than usual, as though her body knew today was different. The room, which had felt so familiar for the past few weeks, now seemed to be holding her hostage. Her childhood bed, with its faded comforter, and the old posters on the wall, all felt like reminders of a life that was no longer hers. She had never been someone to cling to nostalgia, but for some reason, now everything about her old room felt like an anchor, keeping her stuck in place. She stood in front of the mirror and stared at her reflection. Her dark brown hair fell messily around her shoulders, and her pale skin seemed more worn than usual. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt truly alive, truly excited about something. Sophie had always been someone who felt in between things. Not quite the girl who stood out in a crowd, but never the one who faded into the background either. She was, as she liked to think of herself, in the middle. But right now, in this moment, she felt like she was drifting. Get it together, Sophie, she muttered to herself. She forced a smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had to go to that meeting. She had no choice. Maybe this meeting with Mr. Hayes was the key to finding out what came next, or maybe it was just another stop along a road she didn't want to be on. Sophie grabbed a quick breakfast, just some cereal, and threw on an old jacket over a simple t-shirt. She glanced at the clock. 9:30 a.m. She had 30 minutes to get to the school. The drive to Maplewood High was short, but with each passing mile, Sophie's anxiety grew. She hadn't been back here since graduation, and it felt strange. The school had always been a place where she had felt invisible. No one ever really noticed Sophie, at least not in the way they noticed others. She was never part of the popular crowd, never the class president or the athlete with a scholarship. She was just Sophie, a name that didn't seem to carry much weight. Sophie's mind wandered back to her time in high school. It wasn't that she had a miserable experience, but she had never felt like she belonged. Her friends had been nice, but they were always busy with their own lives. And honestly, Sophie didn't know how to connect deeply with anyone. She was always just on the outside looking in. Her family situation hadn't been any better, either. Her parents had divorced when she was 15, and it felt like both of them had checked out emotionally after that. There had been no big fights or emotional confrontations. It was just quiet, empty. They both moved on, as if nothing had changed, and Sophie, left in the middle, had learned to keep her distance. Her phone buzzed again, breaking her from her thoughts. It was Emma. Emma, how's the day going? Any plans after the meeting? Sophie quickly typed back a response. Sophie, I'm not sure. I'm meeting with Mr. Hayes, but that's all I know. I'll keep you posted. Her fingers hesitated over the phone screen for a moment before she decided to add. Sophie, I don't know. Everything just feels off right now. Like I'm stuck. She pressed send and tossed her phone into the passenger seat. She didn't want to dwell on it anymore. It was just another reminder of how much her life felt out of control. Emma, with all her confidence, probably couldn't even understand how Sophie was feeling. Emma was the kind of person who always had a plan. Sophie had never had that luxury. As she pulled into the school parking lot, she couldn't help but feel a wave of unease wash over her. The school, once so familiar, now felt like a strange and distant place. It was almost as if the walls of the building were silently judging her for returning, for not having figured out what she was supposed to do after graduation. She parked her car and took a deep breath before stepping out. The air was crisp and cool, a sharp contrast to the tight feeling in her chest. She made her way toward the entrance, where the school's large wooden doors still held the same imposing presence they always had. She paused, her hand resting on the door handle. This wasn't just any visit to school. This was something bigger. As she walked through the familiar hallways, she felt the weight of memories flood her mind. It was strange how quickly things could change. For years ago, she had been a nervous high school senior walking these same hallways, unsure of what the future would hold. And now, here she was, fresh out of college, and even more uncertain than before. The office door was closed, but Sophie could see Mr. Hayes sitting behind his desk, looking through some papers. She knocked lightly, and his head immediately snapped up. "Come in," he said with a warm, welcoming smile. There was something in his eyes, something that made Sophie think this wasn't just a typical meeting. Sophie stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The room smelled like old books and faint traces of coffee. Mr. Hayes motioned to the chair in front of his desk. "Please have a seat, Sophie," he said, his voice steady but kind. Sophie hesitated for a moment before sitting down. She felt small in this office, even though she had sat in this chair countless times before as a student. Back then, she had never felt truly noticed by Mr. Hayes. He was a figure who remained distant, detached. But today, he seemed different, more approachable. So he began, folding his hands on his desk. "I'm sure you're wondering why I asked you to come in today. I've been thinking a lot about the students who graduated in recent years, and I've come to realize something important." He paused, his gaze focused intently on Sophie. Sophie shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "What is it?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "I believe you've been underestimating yourself, Sophie. And I think it's time you realize just how much potential you have. You've been coasting for a while now, but I think you're ready for something more." Sophie blinked, unsure of what he meant. "More?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" Mr. Hayes smiled gently. "I'm offering you an opportunity. It's not something that comes around often, but I think you're the right person for it." Sophie felt a mixture of confusion and curiosity swirling inside her. She didn't know what this opportunity was, but she knew one thing. Her life, her journey, was about to take a turn she hadn't expected. Sophie sat still in the chair, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what Mr. Hayes had just said. His words echoed in her ears, but she could barely grasp them. She felt as if she were in some kind of dream, disoriented by the abrupt shift in direction her life had just taken. "You've been coasting?" Sophie repeated the words in her mind, trying to understand their weight. Had she really been coasting? It didn't feel that way to her. She had always tried to do her best, go to class, do the assignments, keep her friends close. But Mr. Hayes wasn't talking about that. He was talking about something deeper, something Sophie hadn't fully acknowledged herself. I know this is a lot to take in, Mr. Hayes continued, his voice calm yet firm. But I've been observing something in you for a while. You've got more potential than you realize, Sophie. It's time you stopped living in the background and started taking control of your future. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. What was he talking about? What potential? The only thing she had done consistently was to stay out of trouble, get by without making waves. She was average. And for a long time, that had been enough. Or at least, she had convinced herself it was. But I don't know what you mean, she said softly, her voice betraying her uncertainty. I don't even know what I'm doing right now. I graduated and now, I'm just stuck. Mr. Hayes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of understanding and something else, something that felt like a challenge. That's exactly why I'm here, Sophie. I think you're capable of more. You've got what it takes to step out of your comfort zone. And if you're willing, I want to offer you something that could change everything for you. Sophie felt a tightness in her chest. She didn't want to be rude, but she was beginning to feel overwhelmed. I'm not sure what you're offering, Mr. Hayes, she said carefully, hoping that her confusion didn't sound like outright rejection. Mr. Hayes nodded, as though he expected the question. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope, sealed with the school's official crest. He placed it on the desk in front of her. Inside this envelope is an opportunity to work on a project that could transform your career and your future. It's not something I offer lightly, and I'm not offering it to just anyone. I want you to have a real chance to grow, to learn, and to push yourself in ways that you haven't yet. Sophie stared at the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Her mind was whirling with 100 different thoughts, none of which seemed to fit together. She had no idea what was in the envelope, but the way Mr. Hayes spoke about it made it seem like something huge was at stake. I know this sounds like a lot, Mr. Hayes continued, his tone softening. But sometimes, the biggest moments in life come when you least expect them. All I'm asking is for you to trust me, Sophie. Trust that you're ready for something more. Her gaze moved from the envelope to Mr. Hayes, who was watching her with a kind of quiet intensity. He wasn't trying to rush her, but the weight of his words seemed to press down on her, urging her to make a decision. Sophie had always avoided taking risks. She had always chosen the safe path, the one with the least amount of emotional turmoil. But something about Mr. Hayes' offer felt like it could be different, like it was the push she needed. But could she really trust him? Could she trust herself? I'm not sure I'm ready for something like this, Sophie said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never been good at handling big decisions, at taking risks. I've always played it safe. Mr. Hayes smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who had just won an argument. It was more of a knowing smile, as if he could see right through her self-doubt. I don't expect you to be ready, Sophie. No one ever is, at first. That's the whole point. The moment you feel ready, it's already too late. You have to step into the unknown, even when you're scared. That's where growth happens. Sophie's heart began to race as a sense of unease settled in her stomach. She had spent her whole life trying to avoid uncomfortable situations. She had always convinced herself that if she played it safe, things would be okay. But now she realized that had only left her stagnant. Could she really take that step? Could she push herself into a place where she didn't know what was going to happen next? Sophie glanced down at the envelope again. Her fingers hovered over it, feeling the weight of what lay inside. She could feel the tension mounting inside her, her pulse quickening. She was about to make a choice, and for once, it felt like the kind of choice that could change everything. For the first time in a long while, Sophie felt a spark of something inside her, something that wasn't fear, but possibility. Okay, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I'll do it. Mr. Hayes nodded, his expression now a mix of approval and something else, something Sophie couldn't quite place. Good. I'll make sure you have everything you need. But remember, this isn't going to be easy. It's going to challenge you in ways you haven't experienced before. But I believe in you. Sophie nodded, though she wasn't sure she fully believed in herself just yet. But there was something about Mr. Hayes' unwavering confidence that made her want to try. She reached forward, her hand trembling slightly, and took the envelope from the desk. As she held it in her hands, she felt the weight of the decision she had just made. There was no turning back now. Sophie didn't know what would come next, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change. As Sophie left the office and made her way out of the building, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Her heart was still racing, her thoughts scattered, but there was something else there too, something new. It wasn't certainty, but it was a sense of direction. For the first time in months, Sophie didn't feel so lost. The world outside seemed a little less daunting now, and for the first time in a long time, Sophie wasn't sure of what was ahead. But maybe that was the point. The unknown was scary, yes, but it was also where the potential for real change lived. Sophie didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. It was time to stop playing it safe. Time to step into the unknown, even if it terrified her. The next few days after meeting with Mr. Hayes passed in a blur for Sophie. She barely slept, her mind constantly replaying the conversation, the weight of that envelope pressing on her every time she thought about it. She had agreed to take the opportunity, but now that she was on the brink of stepping into something unfamiliar, Sophie's nerves began to tighten in ways she hadn't expected. What had she gotten herself into? Every time she opened the envelope, her heart raced. But she never got further than staring at the thick packet, wondering if it was truly the right choice. Each time she held it, it felt like holding a map to a completely unknown destination, one that would require her to leave behind everything she had known. Her safe little bubble. Despite the doubt clawing at her, Sophie had always been someone who could push past fear, at least on the outside. It wasn't until now, standing at the crossroads of her own future, that she realized just how deep that fear ran. Finally, after days of back and forth, Sophie decided it was time to see what was inside. She sat at the kitchen table in her apartment, the morning light streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. The envelope sat in front of her like an open door to a place she couldn't quite picture, but knew was waiting for her. With a deep breath, she tore open the seal. Inside were several pages of paperwork, all neatly printed and signed. But it was the letter at the top that caught her attention. She scanned it quickly. Dear Sophie, congratulations on being selected for the Pathway Initiative. This program has been designed specifically for individuals like you, those who have shown potential but may have been too afraid to fully explore it. Through this initiative, you will have the opportunity to work alongside experienced mentors in a fast-paced, real-world setting. This will require dedication, perseverance, and above all, a willingness to step outside your comfort zone. We have selected you based on your unique abilities. You may not see them yet, but we believe you have the potential to do great things. The first phase will begin on Monday. Be prepared for a challenge, but know that we're here to guide you. Sincerely, Mr. Hayes. Sophie reread the letter twice, then a third time, trying to absorb every word. It was all too much to process at once. She had been selected for an initiative? What did that even mean? And the part about her unique abilities. Sophie wasn't sure whether to be flattered or confused. She pushed the letter aside and scanned the rest of the pages. There were forms to sign, non-disclosure agreements, consent forms, details about the mentors, and the vague first phase that was outlined only as Field Assignment 1. The language was formal, almost corporate, which made Sophie feel even more out of place. This wasn't a typical job application, nor was it the sort of opportunity she had ever envisioned herself in. As she signed her name at the bottom of the documents, she realized something important. This was it. This was the moment she could no longer hold back. Sophie wasn't the kind of person who backed out once she had committed, and she had already taken that first step when she agreed to Mr. Hayes' offer. But now, as the paperwork was signed and her future, in some way, had already been decided, Sophie couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fear creeping in. What would this first phase be? Was it going to be an interview? A challenge? A test of some kind? Or was it something more, something far bigger than what she could have ever anticipated? She had no answers. By the time Monday arrived, Sophie had little choice but to dive headfirst into the unknown. The morning felt as surreal as the rest of the week had been. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes she thought were professional enough for whatever lay ahead. She wasn't sure whether to be nervous or excited, but the anticipation sat heavy in her stomach. She felt like she was walking into an entirely different world. A world where she was no longer the shy, uncertain girl she had been before graduation. Arriving at the meeting point, which was a nondescript building downtown, Sophie's nerves were at their peak. She stood in front of a sleek, modern building, the glass windows reflecting the gray sky. Her heart thudded in her chest as she entered, the automatic doors swishing open with a quiet whoosh. The lobby was empty except for a receptionist, who gave her a polite nod when Sophie walked in. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked. "I'm here for the Pathway Initiative," Sophie said, her voice wavering slightly as she felt her anxiety swell. The receptionist's smile faltered for just a moment before she gestured to the elevators. "Please take the elevator to the 10th floor. Someone will meet you there." Sophie nodded, her stomach tightening even more. The elevator ride was short but felt like an eternity. Each floor passed by with an almost mocking slowness. When the elevator finally dinged, she stepped out into an open space that felt like the calm before a storm. The hallway stretched out in front of her with doors lining the sides. At the end of the hallway, a man in a sharp suit was standing, waiting for her. His posture was straight, his face unreadable. As Sophie approached, he offered her a brief but warm smile. He held out his hand. "Sophie, I'm David. I'll be your mentor during this first phase of the initiative." His grip was firm, but his eyes were kind, and Sophie immediately felt a sense of reassurance in his presence. "Nice to meet you," Sophie replied, her voice a little steadier than she expected. David motioned for her to follow him. As they walked through the hallway, Sophie's mind raced. What was she doing here? Who were the other people in this program? What would she be asked to do? David stopped in front of a door and opened it, revealing a modern conference room with a long table. There were already a few people sitting around it. Sophie took a deep breath and walked in, her nerves battling with the excitement that she couldn't quite suppress. "Welcome, Sophie," David said as he closed the door behind her. "This is where it all begins." Sophie sat down at the long conference table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over her since she entered the room. The atmosphere felt strange, as if the air itself was charged with a kind of unspoken tension. The other people around the table looked just as uncertain, their faces filled with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They were all new to this, just like Sophie, and the unknown was weighing heavily on each of them. David, the mentor who had greeted her, stood at the head of the table, his eyes scanning each person in the room. Sophie could feel the weight of his gaze, though it wasn't unkind. His posture was commanding, yet there was something approachable in the way he carried himself. He waited for a few moments, allowing the room to settle before speaking. "Welcome, everyone," David began, his voice calm yet filled with authority. "You've all been chosen to be a part of this program because we believe in your potential. You're not here by accident. You've been selected because you have something inside of you that can make a real impact, but you need to learn how to harness it." Sophie's mind wandered as she listened to his words. She couldn't quite pinpoint what she was feeling, but it was as if a quiet storm was brewing inside her. Part of her wanted to believe in what David was saying, wanted to believe that she had potential worth investing in. But the other part of her was still rooted in doubt, in the fear of not measuring up, of being exposed for the fraud she sometimes felt like. David continued, his voice cutting through her swirling thoughts. The first phase is designed to challenge you in ways you've never been challenged before. You will be expected to push past your limits, to fail and learn from it, and above all, to work as a team. There is no room for hesitation here. If you choose to stay, you will need to give everything you have. The words echoed in Sophie's mind. No room for hesitation. She had always hesitated, always taken the safe path. Was she really ready to give everything? David paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in before giving a slight nod. Today, you will face your first challenge. And it will test you more than anything you've done before. So, if you're ready, follow me. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. Her stomach churned with a wave of uncertainty. The others around the table shifted in their seats, some looking at each other with wide eyes, others staring straight ahead, trying to maintain composure. No one spoke. There was only the heavy silence, thick with anticipation. David led the group through a series of hallways, each more sterile and clinical than the last. The building felt less like an office space and more like a training facility, cold, impersonal, designed for one thing: performance. Sophie's nerves began to fray with each step. What kind of challenge awaited them? She felt herself questioning everything again. Was she really prepared for whatever this was? They finally stopped in front of a large door, and David turned to face them, his expression now completely unreadable. Behind this door, he said, is your first test. You'll be facing off against each other, but it's not about winning. It's about learning how to collaborate, how to push your boundaries, and how to accept failure without letting it break you. This will be difficult, but it will show you what you're truly capable of. Sophie could feel her pulse quicken, and her palms grew clammy as David reached for the handle of the door. He turned it, and the door swung open to reveal a large, empty room with nothing but a whiteboard and a few chairs in the center. Today, you're going to be working together to solve a problem, David explained, stepping aside to let them enter. But there's a twist. You won't be told what the problem is until you're inside. Each of you has something to offer, but you must rely on one another to succeed. Sophie felt a rush of panic. A problem? Without knowing what it is? The room was silent as everyone hesitated, unsure of whether to step inside. Sophie felt the urge to turn and leave, to run away and go back to the safety of her small world. But then she thought about Mr. Hayes' words, "You've got more potential than you realize. It's time you stopped living in the background." She had come this far, hadn't she? She couldn't back out now. With a deep breath, Sophie stepped forward, followed closely by the others. They gathered around the whiteboard, unsure of what to expect. The door clicked shut behind them, and the room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in. David stood by the door, watching them with an almost impassive expression. "Your task is simple," he said. "You need to work together to create a marketing plan for a product that doesn't exist. You won't be given any details about the product. You have to come up with your own ideas, your own strategies, and sell it to me in 30 minutes. But here's the catch. One of you will be eliminated after this challenge." Sophie's stomach dropped. Eliminated? Her mind raced with panic. This wasn't what she had signed up for. She hadn't signed up to be eliminated. She had no idea what she was doing. She could feel the others eyeing each other, unsure of how to proceed. There was no time to waste, but none of them seemed to know where to begin. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for something to grab onto. Anything that would help her make sense of this surreal situation. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, it felt like she couldn't breathe. And then, something inside her snapped. The fear that had gripped her before suddenly transformed into focus. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, whether she liked it or not. Sophie realized that the key to this challenge wasn't about knowing the right answers. It was about jumping in, taking risks, and not being afraid to fail. She had no idea what the others were thinking, but she knew what she needed to do. I think we should start by focusing on the market. Who's our target audience? Sophie asked, her voice clear, though her hands were still shaking. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in that moment, it was enough. David's eyes flickered with something, approval, perhaps, but he didn't say anything. He simply nodded. The rest of the group seemed to fall in line, each person beginning to contribute their own ideas. Sophie's mind raced as she started to sketch out a plan. For the first time in a long while, she felt the beginnings of something she hadn't experienced before: confidence. The next 30 minutes flew by in a blur of collaboration, brainstorming, and rapid-fire decision-making. Sophie found herself working with the others, bouncing ideas off one another, pushing her own boundaries as she went. They weren't just working as a team, they were building something out of nothing, relying on each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. And when the clock finally ran out, Sophie looked up, her heart still pounding, but with a sense of accomplishment. She had done it. She hadn't just survived the first test, she had pushed through it, learned from it, and come out stronger. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sophie sat in the quiet of her small apartment that evening, her body exhausted, her mind still racing from the whirlwind of the day. The first phase of the Pathway Initiative had already proven to be more intense than she had ever imagined. What had started as a simple marketing challenge had morphed into something far deeper, something far more revealing. It was as if the program had stripped away the layers of comfort she had hidden behind for so long. As the evening wore on, Sophie replayed the day's events in her mind. The challenge had been unlike anything she'd expected. The pressure, the uncertainty, the stakes, all of it had been overwhelming. But in the midst of it, something shifted inside her. The fear, once paralyzing, had become fuel. The uncertainty, which had once made her want to retreat, had forced her to step forward. She had learned something crucial about herself today. Sophie had always prided herself on being the quiet observer, the person who stayed out of the spotlight. She had convinced herself that she wasn't meant to be the leader, that she didn't have what it took to take charge or speak up. But in that conference room, when the clock was ticking, Sophie had found a voice she didn't know she had. She had stepped into the challenge headfirst, trusting her instincts and leaning on the strengths of her teammates. And in that moment, Sophie realized that she wasn't as powerless as she had believed. The elimination, a looming threat that had weighed on her throughout the challenge, had been the hardest part. No one wanted to be the one who failed. But as the group presented their plan to David, and as he assessed each of them carefully, Sophie saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't looking for perfection. He wasn't looking for flawless execution. He was looking for potential, for growth, and for the ability to overcome failure and continue moving forward. In the end, no one was eliminated that day. Instead, David told them that the real challenge wasn't the task itself. It was what they did after the task was over. How they reflected on their experience, how they handled the pressure, and how they grew from it. Sophie had expected to feel relief when the tension in the room lifted. Instead, she was left with something more profound, a sense of pride. She hadn't just made it through. She had learned something valuable about herself and the way she approached challenges. This wasn't just a test of skills, it was a test of character, and Sophie had passed. Now, sitting alone in her apartment, Sophie thought about the bigger picture. The Pathway Initiative was about more than just this first challenge. It was about uncovering the potential within each of them, pushing boundaries, and finding a way to continue growing, even when things didn't go as planned. She thought back to her conversation with Mr. Hayes, the man who had encouraged her to step out of her comfort zone. She remembered his words, "You've got more potential than you realize." It's time you stopped living in the background." It wasn't just empty words, it was a truth she was finally starting to grasp. Sophie thought about the people she had met so far, the other participants in the program. They were all different, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. But they shared something important. They were willing to take risks, to fail, and to learn from those failures. They weren't defined by their past mistakes. Instead, they were using those mistakes as stepping stones towards something greater. As Sophie reflected on her own journey, she realized that she wasn't alone in this. She had the support of the others, the guidance of her mentor, and the chance to create something bigger than herself. This wasn't just about achieving success, it was about learning to navigate the ups and downs, the highs and lows, and the unexpected twists along the way. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy. Sophie knew that. But for the first time in a long while, she felt ready for whatever came next. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that building just days ago. She had grown, even if only a little. She had faced her fears head-on, and now she was stronger for it. Sophie didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. She was no longer afraid to take the next step. As the night deepened, Sophie stood up from her couch, her heart light, her spirit brimming with a quiet sense of resolve. She walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights below. The world felt both vast and full of possibility. She was no longer standing at the edge of her own life, watching from afar. She was finally stepping forward. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of strength, but Sophie was no longer the uncertain girl who had hesitated. She was someone different now, someone who knew that no matter what happened, she had the courage to keep moving forward. And with that realization, Sophie smiled. The following week was a blur of activity for Sophie. Each day, she faced new challenges designed to push her further than she ever thought possible. As she moved through the program, she began to settle into a routine. The tension from the first day had faded, replaced with a quiet determination. Sophie had learned to keep her fears at bay, pushing herself forward with each passing day, each new obstacle. Yet, something was off. There were moments, small, fleeting moments, when Sophie felt like the floor beneath her wasn't as steady as it should have been. There were times she caught herself questioning her instincts, as if something from her past was pulling at the edges of her mind, reminding her of her limitations, her fears, the version of herself she was desperately trying to leave behind. It was a Wednesday morning when the unexpected twist came, right as she was starting to feel comfortable again. Sophie was in a group brainstorming session, working with a new set of colleagues on a marketing strategy for a product launch. The group was dynamic, full of ideas and energy, and for a brief moment, Sophie felt like she was finally in her element. She was contributing freely, offering insights, pushing the group to think outside the box. It felt good to be seen, to be heard. But then, just as Sophie was in the middle of a particularly animated conversation about target audiences, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It wasn't unusual for her to receive messages during the workday, but the sudden ping made her heart race. She pulled out her phone, discreetly checking the notification. The message was from her mother, a single line of text that stopped her in her tracks. "Sophie, we need to talk. It's about Dad." Her heart dropped. She had been expecting something like this, but the moment the message arrived, it felt like the world had tilted on its axis. The tight knot in her stomach that had been slowly loosening over the past few weeks snapped back into place, a weight she hadn't felt in so long. Her father, the man who had been the cornerstone of her childhood, the man who had always promised to be there, who had made her believe in the stability of their family. But in recent years, the relationship had soured, marked by distance, unresolved tension, and a series of broken promises. Sophie hadn't spoken to her father in months, not since the last major fight they had about her decision to move to the city, to step away from the life they had always known. Her mind whirled, a million thoughts racing through her. Was something wrong with him? Was he sick? Was this the conversation she had been dreading? Sophie tried to steady herself, forcing a deep breath as she turned her attention back to the group. The buzz of conversation continued around her, but she was no longer listening. Her focus was entirely on the message she had just received. She had to know what was going on. "I'll be right back," she said quickly, excusing herself from the room. Her voice felt distant, like it wasn't even her speaking. She needed a moment, needed to find clarity, but all she could feel was a sense of impending dread. She stepped out into the hallway, her legs heavy as if they were made of lead. The building felt colder now, the walls pressing in around her. She opened the message from her mother, hoping for something that would offer reassurance, but all she saw was more uncertainty. "It's urgent. Please call me when you can. I think we need to face this together. I don't know how much time we have." Time. That word hit her like a freight train. Was something truly wrong with her father? Was he in trouble? Sophie's pulse quickened, her breath coming in short bursts as panic rose in her chest. She quickly dialed her mother's number, the phone ringing in her ear. The seconds felt like minutes. When her mother finally answered, her voice was soft but strained. "Sophie, I'm so glad you called. I didn't want to tell you like this, but your father's health has taken a turn for the worse. He's in the hospital, and we don't know how much time he has left." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. The world tilted again, but this time there was no steady ground to fall back on. "What happened?" she managed to choke out. Her mother's voice cracked. "It's his heart. He's been struggling for a while, but he refused to go to the doctor." "It's too late now, Sophie. The doctors say he doesn't have much longer. We need to talk about what happens next. You need to come home." Sophie's mind swam. The thought of her father, the man who had been her hero growing up, now lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. She couldn't wrap her mind around it. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She had left home to start fresh, to build a life outside the shadow of her past. Now her past had come crashing into her present, dragging her back to a place she had been desperate to escape. I don't know what to say," Sophie whispered, her voice shaky. She could feel tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "I need some time. I'll book a flight. I'll be there as soon as I can." "Thank you," her mother said quietly. "I know this is hard. But he needs you, Sophie." Sophie hung up the phone, feeling a cold emptiness inside her. She had spent so long trying to outrun her past, trying to move beyond the relationships and responsibilities that had once defined her. But now she couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to face it. Face him. With a heavy heart, she turned back toward the conference room. Her mind was no longer on the marketing strategy or the team she had been working with. It was with her father, the man who had shaped her life in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from David, the program leader. "Sophie, we've got a big presentation coming up. I know you've been through a lot lately, but don't forget your commitment. We're counting on you." The words hit her like a punch in the gut. She had made a commitment to the program, to herself. She had promised to push through the fear, to face challenges head-on. But now, with her father's life hanging in the balance, Sophie was torn. Could she keep going with the program? Could she truly focus on her future while her past was in such turmoil? The road ahead felt impossibly difficult. But one thing was certain, this moment, this crisis, was going to force her to decide once and for all what kind of person she wanted to be. Could she find a way to honor both her past and her future? Could she face her fears and still move forward, even when everything seemed to be falling apart? Sophie didn't have the answers. Not yet. But for the first time, she was ready to find out. The flight to her hometown felt like an eternity. Sophie sat in the cramped seat, staring out of the window as the landscape below passed by. Her thoughts swirled in a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and uncertainty. The last time she had been here, her father had been the strong, stoic figure she had always relied on. The man who could solve every problem, fix every broken thing in her life. But now he was vulnerable, lying in a hospital bed with no guarantee of tomorrow. The thought made Sophie's chest tighten. As the plane descended toward her destination, Sophie's mind replayed the fractured relationship with her father, the arguments, the disappointments, the growing distance between them. She had left home with a sense of finality, convinced that breaking free was the only way to find herself. But now, here she was, about to return to the very place she had tried to escape. She stepped off the plane, her feet hitting the familiar ground of her hometown, and felt an immediate wave of nostalgia. The smells, the sounds, the buildings, everything had remained unchanged, as if time had stood still. But Sophie knew she hadn't. She had grown. She had changed. And now she was here, standing at the crossroads of her past and her future. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind as she drove to the hospital. "He needs you, Sophie." The words weighed on her heavily, but she wasn't sure what she was supposed to do with them. What did her father need from her? Hadn't they already said everything that needed to be said during their last confrontation? Sophie didn't know. All she knew was that she was about to face him, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. As she entered the hospital, the sterile smell and bright lights immediately hit her senses. The noise of nurses rushing past, the beeping machines. It all felt so foreign now, so far removed from the quiet life she had built in the city. Sophie was immediately directed to her father's room. Her hands were clammy as she pushed open the door. He was lying in the bed, a shadow of the man he once was. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and the steady rhythm of the heart monitor seemed to be the only sound in the room. Sophie felt her breath catch in her throat. It was hard to reconcile this frail version of her father with the vibrant, larger-than-life man she had grown up with. Her mother was sitting beside him, her hand gently holding his. She looked up when Sophie entered, her face filled with a mixture of relief and worry. "Hey, honey," her mother said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophie nodded, trying to mask the storm of emotions surging within her. She walked over to her father's bedside and stood there, unsure of what to say. She had never been good at dealing with these kinds of moments, these raw, vulnerable encounters. They had always felt like too much, too heavy. "I didn't think you'd come," her father rasped, his voice hoarse, but unmistakably familiar. Sophie swallowed hard. There it was, the unspoken acknowledgement of their distance, the years of silence. "I'm here," Sophie said quietly, sitting down beside him. I didn't know what to expect." Her father's hand twitched slightly as if reaching out for some connection, some acknowledgement that they were still family, still connected despite the fracture between them. Sophie hesitated, then placed her hand on his. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, her voice cracking. The words felt strange, coming out of her mouth, like they didn't belong to her. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to feel this vulnerable, this raw. "I'm sorry too," her father whispered. "I should have been better, for you, for your mother. I should have supported you more when you made your choice. I should have understood." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away, embarrassed by the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. It was too much, too sudden. But for the first time in so long, she felt like her father was truly seeing her, not just as his daughter, but as a person, someone who had her own dreams, her own life, her own struggles. "I've been so angry," Sophie admitted. "I thought leaving would make everything better, that I could move on and forget all the things that hurt. But it's never that simple, is it?" Her father's eyes softened. "No, sweetheart, it's not. We don't always get to choose how things turn out, but we can choose how we move forward. I'm proud of you, Sophie. You've done things I never thought you could." Sophie shook her head. "I haven't done enough. I'm not who I thought I'd be by now. I don't even know if I've made the right choices. You've made the choices that were right for you, her father said quietly. Don't doubt that. Don't doubt yourself. Sophie looked at him, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove herself, trying to break free of the expectations, of the weight of her family's legacy. But sitting here now, with her father's frail hand in hers, Sophie realized that it wasn't about running away. It was about finding the balance, finding peace within herself and with the people who loved her. I've learned so much, Sophie said, her voice steady now. About myself, about what I really want in life. And I want you to know that even if we've had our differences, I still love you. I never stopped. Her father's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and he gave her hand a weak squeeze. I love you too, Sophie. I always have. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the past pressing in around them. But for the first time in a long time, Sophie felt like she was beginning to heal. The distance between them was still there, but it was no longer an unbridgeable gap. There was room now for understanding, for forgiveness, and for moving forward. As the hours passed, Sophie's mother stepped out to give them some privacy. Sophie stayed by her father's side, her mind wandering to the journey she had started in the Pathway Initiative. It felt so far away now, as if the program, the challenges, and the future she had been building were part of another life. But deep down, she knew she couldn't let go of that part of herself. She had come here to reconcile with her father, but in doing so, Sophie realized that this was just one part of her story. She could honor her past while still moving toward the future. She could be the daughter she needed to be and the woman she was becoming. Both roles, intertwined, were a part of her journey. The path ahead was unclear, and the challenges weren't over. But Sophie was ready now, ready to face both the shadows of her past and the bright possibilities of her future. The days following Sophie's return to the city felt like a blur, each one passing by in a haze of uncertainty and reflection. Her father was still in the hospital, but his condition had stabilized, just enough to give Sophie the time and space she needed to return to the program, the life she had started to build in the city. She spent the next few days visiting him in the hospital, slowly finding the balance between her new responsibilities and the ones she could no longer ignore. The guilt she had carried for so long, the guilt of abandoning her family, of choosing herself over them, began to lift, just a little. She wasn't sure what the future held with her father, but there was something about the way he had looked at her when they'd spoken that gave her hope. Hope that things could be repaired. Hope that they could find their way back to each other, despite the years of hurt. But there was something else too. Something that Sophie had pushed aside during the chaos of the past few weeks. She had been so focused on her past, on her father and the fractures in their relationship, that she had almost forgotten the reason she had left home in the first place. She had come to the city not just to escape, but to find her own path, to discover who she really was beyond the expectations placed on her. And the Pathway Initiative, while filled with its own challenges, had become the beacon of that future. But even with everything she had gained from the program, there was still that nagging feeling. The feeling that there was more she was meant to accomplish, something more than just proving herself to everyone around her. What did success even mean to her anymore? Was it just about excelling in the program, or was there something deeper, something more meaningful she needed to pursue? As Sophie sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen, her phone buzzed with a message from David, her program leader. Sophie, can you meet me at the office later today? I have something important to discuss. Her heart skipped a beat. The last time David had asked her for a one-on-one, it had been about the marketing presentation, and that had been a turning point for her in the program. But this felt different. More urgent, more personal. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. She pushed away from her desk and headed to the office building, the city around her feeling strangely distant as she walked. The noise, the bustle of the people, it all felt muted, like she was stepping into a different world. The tension in her chest had returned, but this time, It wasn't from fear of failure. It was something else. Curiosity, maybe? Anxiety. When Sophie arrived at David's office, she found him sitting behind his desk, looking unusually serious. "Sophie, come in. Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of him. Sophie sat down, trying to gauge his mood. There was an air of anticipation in the room, as if David was preparing to say something significant. "David, what's going on?" Sophie asked, her voice tight. "You said it was important." David sighed, folding his hands on the desk in front of him. He paused for a long moment before speaking. "Sophie, I've been keeping an eye on your progress," he said, his tone calm but weighted with meaning. "I know things have been challenging for you recently, and I admire how you've handled it all. But I want to talk to you about something else. Something I've been thinking about for a while now." Sophie's stomach twisted. She had no idea where this conversation was going, but she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "You've got a lot of potential, Sophie," David continued, his eyes steady as he looked at her. "More than you realize. And I've seen how you've grown over the past few months, not just as a leader in the program, but as a person. You've learned to overcome your doubts, your fears. But there's one thing I think you need to do now if you really want to make a lasting impact in the world." Sophie sat up straighter, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" David smiled, the first hint of warmth breaking through his serious demeanor. "You need to step outside of your comfort zone. You've made incredible progress here, but there's something more you can do. Something bigger than the program. You've got the skills, the ideas. What I'm suggesting is that you take on a leadership role, Sophie. Not just within the Pathway Initiative, but beyond it. Help us develop new programs, lead new projects, make a difference." Sophie was stunned. She had been so focused on proving herself in the program that she hadn't even considered taking the next step. A leadership role? It felt so far beyond what she thought she could do. She had always seen herself as someone who was just learning, growing, and figuring it all out. How could she possibly lead others? "But Sophie started, her words faltering. "I'm still trying to figure things out. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that." David leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Sophie, you've already done more than you realize. You're already leading others, whether you see it or not. It's in the way you approach challenges, the way you think outside the box, the way you care about people, about the impact we're making. That's the kind of leadership we need. I'm not saying you need to have all the answers. I'm saying you need to take the next step and trust yourself." Sophie felt a wave of doubt wash over her. Was she really ready? Could she lead? It felt like the stakes had suddenly become so much higher. The responsibility, the expectations. It was a lot to handle, especially with everything going on with her family. But as she looked into David's eyes, something clicked inside her. The doubts, the fears, they were all part of the journey. And if she kept running from them, she would never grow. "I don't know if I can do it," Sophie admitted, her voice small. "But I want to try." David's expression softened. "That's all I ask, Sophie. Just take the first step. The rest will follow." Sophie nodded slowly, a sense of determination beginning to build inside her. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she would stop doubting herself and start moving forward, even in the face of uncertainty. She had a chance to make an impact, to lead, to create something meaningful. And no matter how daunting it seemed, she was ready to take that leap. As she left David's office, Sophie felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervous anticipation. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. It was time to step into her own power. And she was no longer afraid. Sophie barely slept that night. Her mind buzzed with 100 different thoughts, each one pushing her in a different direction. The idea of stepping into a leadership role was overwhelming, to say the least. How could she, someone who had spent most of her life questioning her worth, lead others? How could she inspire them, help them grow, when she was still figuring out who she was herself? But somewhere, deep inside, She knew this was her moment. The time for doubt was over. Sophie wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived at the Pathway Initiative. She had proven herself in so many ways, not just to her mentors, but to herself. She had faced fears, tackled obstacles, and discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. And now, David had given her the key to a new chapter, one where she could truly make a difference. That morning, as Sophie prepared to meet with David again to discuss the specifics of the role, she found herself standing in front of the mirror, taking a long look at her reflection. The woman staring back at her was different from the girl who had walked into the program months ago. She was stronger, more confident, and ready to take on whatever came next. It was time to stop hiding from her potential. She straightened her back, took a deep breath, and walked out the door. Today was the day she would take the leap. David was waiting for her in his office when she arrived, his demeanor calm and encouraging as always. The moment Sophie walked in, he greeted her with a warm smile. "Ready?" he asked. Sophie hesitated for a second, her heart still racing, but then she nodded. "Yes, let's do this." David motioned for her to sit down. "I'm glad to hear that. Let's talk through the details." As Sophie sat across from him, she felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervous energy. David explained the role in more detail. She would oversee several new initiatives within the program, including developing training modules for new participants, leading team-building projects, and even helping to shape the direction of future projects. It was a huge responsibility, but Sophie realized that it was exactly what she had been searching for. A chance to be a leader in her own right, not just someone who followed orders, but someone who could create, inspire, and guide others. The opportunity was daunting, yes, but it was also exactly what she needed to step into her own. It was a test, not just of her professional skills, but of her ability to trust herself. "David, I'm nervous," Sophie admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "What if I fail? What if I let everyone down?" David leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You'll feel that way, Sophie. It's normal. Every great leader has doubts. But what sets them apart isn't the fear, it's how they move forward despite it. Don't let fear paralyze you. Use it as fuel to push you even further. You have everything you need to succeed." Sophie felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'm ready. I want to make an impact. I want to help others like I've been helped." David smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "That's the spirit. I knew you had it in you. Let's get started." The first few weeks in her new role were a whirlwind. Sophie threw herself into her work, diving headfirst into projects, organizing workshops, and leading meetings. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, moments when the responsibility felt too heavy, but she reminded herself that this was part of the process. She wasn't going to get everything perfect on the first try. And that was okay. She had learned from the Pathway Initiative that failure wasn't a setback, it was a learning opportunity. One afternoon, Sophie found herself leading a meeting with a small group of new participants who had recently joined the program. As she looked around the room, she realized just how much she had grown. These people, just like she had been, were full of uncertainty, wondering if they had what it took to succeed. Sophie recognized that look in their eyes. She had seen it in her own reflection many times before. She began to speak, her voice steady and confident. "I know some of you might be feeling a bit unsure of yourselves right now," she said, pausing to make eye contact with each person. "When I first started this program, I felt the same way. I wasn't sure if I was good enough, if I could keep up. But let me tell you something. You don't have to have all the answers right away. You just have to keep going, one step at a time. And trust me, you'll get there." Her words seemed to resonate with the group. She could see their shoulders relax, their expressions softening. There was power in vulnerability. By sharing her own struggles, Sophie had connected with them in a way she never had before. She wasn't just their leader, She was one of them, someone who had faced the same challenges, who understood their fears and doubts. As the meeting ended, one of the participants lingered behind, walking up to Sophie. "I just wanted to say thanks," she said softly. "I wasn't sure I could do this, but hearing you speak, I feel like I can try." Sophie smiled, her heart swelling with a sense of pride. "You can," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "You just have to believe in yourself." The days turned into weeks, and Sophie found herself growing more and more comfortable in her role. She made mistakes, of course, everyone did, but each one was a stepping stone toward improvement. She learned how to communicate more effectively, how to inspire those around her, and, most importantly, how to trust her own instincts. But it wasn't just the professional growth that amazed her. It was the personal growth, the way she began to heal the fractures in her relationships, the way she learned to reconcile the woman she had been with the woman she was becoming. She stayed in touch with her family, visiting her father as often as she could. The bond they were rebuilding, though fragile, was a source of strength for her. Sophie realized that she didn't need to choose between her past and her future. They could coexist. And in doing so, they gave her a deeper sense of purpose. David's words echoed in her mind, "You have everything you need to succeed." And for the first time in her life, Sophie believed him. She wasn't perfect, but she was enough. As Sophie looked ahead to the challenges and opportunities waiting for her, she no longer saw them as obstacles. She saw them as the next step in her journey, a journey that had only just begun. The sun was setting on another busy week, and Sophie found herself standing on the rooftop of the office building where she had spent the last few months of her life. The city stretched out before her, the lights flickering on as the evening descended. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. It was just a few months ago that she had walked into the city, uncertain of her place in the world, weighed down by the baggage of her past. Now, as she gazed out over the city, Sophie felt a sense of peace. She was no longer the person she had been when she first arrived. She had transformed. And it wasn't just about the professional success she had achieved or the role she now played within the Pathway Initiative. It was about everything she had learned along the way, about herself, about the world, and about the people who mattered most to her. The last few weeks had been nothing short of transformative. She had stepped into a leadership role that had forced her to confront her deepest fears and doubts. And every day, she had chosen to push through, even when the weight of the responsibility felt overwhelming. And through it all, she had discovered something about herself that she never thought possible. She was capable. She was capable of leading, of inspiring others, of creating change. But more than that, she was capable of finding balance. Balance between her personal and professional life, between her ambitions and her relationships. As she stood there, Sophie's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her father. "How's everything going? I'm so proud of you, Sophie. I can't wait to see you next weekend." Her heart swelled as she read the message. The relationship with her father had been healing, slowly but surely. The scars of their past were still there, but they no longer defined her. They were just part of the story, the part that had shaped her into who she was today. Sophie had realized that it wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. About learning from the past and using those lessons to move forward. She wasn't the same person who had left home all those months ago, and she didn't have to be. She had grown. She had found her own path, a path that was hers to define. As she typed out a quick reply to her father, Sophie thought about how far she had come. When she had first joined the Pathway Initiative, she had been filled with doubt and fear. She had struggled to believe in herself, unsure if she was even worthy of the opportunity. But now, looking back, she realized just how much she had accomplished. Not just professionally, but personally. She had found her voice, her confidence, her ability to lead. And yet, as she looked out over the city, she knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much more to learn, so much more to do. But Sophie no longer feared the future. She embraced it. The next morning, Sophie sat at her desk, preparing for the upcoming presentation she was about to give to the rest of the team. This time, there was no hesitation, no self-doubt. She had something important to say, and she knew her words would matter. As she glanced over her notes, her phone buzzed again. It was David. "Sophie, I've been meaning to talk to you. We have an opportunity for you to take on an even bigger role with the program. Can you meet me at the office later today?" Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She had only just started to settle into her current role, and now it seemed there was an even bigger opportunity on the horizon. She couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. What was this new opportunity? Was she ready for it? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was one of her colleagues, Mark, who was part of the new program she had been helping to develop. "Hey, Sophie, do you have a minute? I wanted to run something by you for the new initiative," Mark said, holding a stack of papers. "Of course. Come on in," Sophie replied, gesturing to the seat across from her. As they discussed the new ideas for the program, Sophie felt the same excitement she had felt when she first started this journey. The Pathway Initiative was about more than just a job. It was about creating something that could truly make a difference. And Sophie was right in the thick of it, helping to shape that future. Later that afternoon, Sophie met with David in his office. She walked in, feeling a mixture of excitement and curiosity. David was seated behind his desk, a familiar smile on his face. "Hi, Sophie. Come in. Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Sophie sat down, her heart racing. She had no idea what to expect. "So, what's this new opportunity?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. David leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Sophie, you've done an incredible job since joining the program. You've grown not just as a professional, but as a leader. And I think you're ready for more. We have an opening for a director of one of our upcoming national projects. It's a huge opportunity, one that will put you at the forefront of our mission to expand the initiative across the country." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. Director? National project? It felt like everything she had been working toward was finally coming together. This was the chance she had dreamed of, the opportunity to lead on a much larger scale. But it was also the biggest challenge she had ever faced. "I don't know what to say," Sophie whispered, her mind racing. "This is huge." David nodded. "I know it's a big decision, but I have no doubt that you're ready for this. You've already proven yourself time and time again. This is your moment." Sophie sat in silence for a moment, her mind swirling with possibilities. This was everything she had worked for. But it also meant stepping into a new chapter, one that would require even more of her time, energy, and focus. It wasn't just about leading a team anymore, it was about shaping the future of something bigger than herself. And as she sat there, looking at David, Sophie realized something. She wasn't afraid. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. It was time to embrace it. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady and full of conviction. "I'm ready." David's smile widened. "I knew you would be. Congratulations, Sophie. You've earned this." As Sophie left his office, her heart was full. This was the beginning of the rest of her life, a life she had shaped through hard work, growth, and self-discovery. And though the journey ahead would be challenging, Sophie knew that she was ready for it. She had found her path, and now nothing could stop her. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?